Okay, so another way that you can solve quadratics is using completing the square. You've learned that you can solve quadratics in many different ways. We've done factoring and square roots, but remember that only works sometimes. We've also done quadratic formula, which will work with all of the quadratics. The completing the square is also another way that will work every single time. Oops, sorry. So remember that when solving quadratics, they need to be in standard form and set equal to 0. It's going to be important in a little bit when we actually start doing completing the square. So before we actually start doing completing the square, we want to go over the basics of it. So you're going to start seeing questions like, what is the value of c such that x squared minus 16x plus c is a perfect square trinomial? So we want to have a trinomial, remember, which is 3 terms, so x squared negative 16x plus some number c, and we want it to be a perfect square so that we can have, so that we're going to eventually make it so that we can factor it. Okay, so your first steps are to make sure that you're going to be having to pull out what c should be. So you're going to find out what b is. So you're going to identify b. And in this situation, b equals negative 16. Your next, oops, sorry, that didn't, right, negative 16. Your next step, after you have identified what the b value is to do b over 2 and then square it. So in this particular instance, b is negative 16, so we're going to have negative 16 over 2 all squared. So negative 16 over 2 simplifies to negative 8 all squared, which is going to simplify to positive 64. Okay, so then substitute in for c. So substitute in for c. Now you should be writing these directions down on your paper and then also writing these steps down over off to here. So we're going to instead have x squared minus 16x plus 64. So I'll give you a second to write those down. Okay, so when we have to do number 2, what is the value of c so that we have x squared plus 20x plus c is a perfect square trinomial. So to make it a perfect square trinomial, remember the first step is to identify b. So in this situation, b is positive 20. Step 2 is to do 20 divided by 2 and square it. So remember 20 divided by 2 is 10 and 10 squared is 100. And step 3 is to substitute that new number in for c, because this is what c will equal. So we would have x squared plus 20x plus 100. So now I'm going to have you try some. So I need somebody to pause the video so that you can go and try these, and then we'll see how you did. Okay, so remember on step 3, we first identify what b is, so b equals 18, that's your first step. Your second step is to do 18 over 2 divided by 2, which will be 9 squared. So 18 divided by 2, then square it. So we have 9 squared, which will be 81, and then substitute in for c. So x squared plus 18x plus 81 would be your final answer. Okay, on number 4, first step, b equals 17. Your next step is to have 17 over 2 squared. So remember 17 over 2, it's not going to give you a nice number, but you can still do the division. So 17 over 2 equals 8.5 or 8.5. And then we have to square it. So you get your c equals 72.25. So you could have g squared plus 17g plus 72.25. But sometimes we're not going to want to have that, we're going to end up wanting to keep it as a fraction. So instead, if you think about doing it this way, where you have your 17 squared, if you instead square 17, you're going to have, sorry, put it over here. Instead, we'll do 17 over 2 squared. That means square the numerator and square the denominator. So 17 squared is 289, and 2 squared is 4. So instead, you should leave it in this form because it's going to make your life easier later. So you're going to want to instead not write it this way, but you're going to want to write it as g squared plus 17g plus 289 over 4. So if you wrote it the other way, write this down now. Okay, so p squared minus 30p plus c. So your first step, identify b as negative 30. Second step is to do 30 divided by 2 and square it. So negative 30 divided by 2 is negative 15. Negative 15 squared equals 225. So your last step is to substitute in p squared minus 30p plus 225, and there's your answer. Okay, so now take out your Chapter 10 packet, like it says at the bottom of this page, and turn to the practice that says 9-5, Form G, and start doing numbers 1 through 6. And then you'll go over those, and then we will watch a second video.